I want to introduce you to a new project. This is one of my latest. I've made it from walnut. I started with rough boards. I worked through all the joinery, and it's got a very unique concept about the joinery that you'll learn as you come along with me on the journey. But I think this is going to be an amazing project for you to make. I've got this propped up on a couple of stools, but imagine this as a full height bookcase like this, or a low one, which is what this one is. This is a small one, a more compact one, but you could scale this. You can go wider, you can go longer, you can go narrower. You can do whatever you want with this design. The concept is what I really want to get across to you. Walnut rough sawn it was, and I started hand planing, took it through its paces, took the planes, 3 planes, 4 planes, different types, and I ended up with a bookcase. This is amazing, and I think you'll enjoy making this, so come with me on the journey, because I want you to have as much skill as I have. I decided I wanted to make a bookshelf because, you know, I can get carried away with complicated pieces, and what I wanted was to show you how you can put together a simple bookshelf, and you can make it any size you want from the instructions that I'm going to give you now. So this is going to be a blast for all of us. It is for me, and it will be for you. I have cut all my pieces exactly to the size I want. So this is going to govern my overall width. I've got 3 bookshelves that go beneath the top shelf. So it's going to have 4 shelves altogether. I've squared up my end here. I've got everything aligned, and I've made sure I've spent time sizing my pieces. But I've got some tricks in this, because not all thicknesses when you're using hand planes will come out identically, and I'm going to use a housing dado that will knock your socks off, because everything is going to be exactly a width, and then we're going to fit the shelves to that. But to start off with, I'm going to dismiss one of these. This is called a marking gauge. I'm not dismissing them all together. They do have function, and they're an amazing tool, and they've been going for a very long time. Hundreds of years, in fact. What we're going to use is my router. I'm going to use a router to establish certain things. Now, I've got about 8 housing dados that I want to put into this unit. So if that's the case, I made them all the same depth. I've made them 1/4 of an inch deep. And what I did is I took a piece of wood, put my gauge in, making sure that I'll put a little mark in there for you. And then I took the decent ruler and checked myself, because I want it to be dead on 1/4 of an inch. So that's how I established that. From here, I can use this for all of my depths when I work through this. So this one, I'm just making a mark, and I'm making a mark here. Now those lines will go across all 3 eventually, but just for now, I'm just going to put that mark on. I'm going to deepen it with my knife. This is called a knife wall now. And you can go all the way across all 3 if you want to. I'm going to focus on one, because this one is going to be the one that I'm going to use to establish all the distances. So I could square those lines across there. That would be very traditional. That's what every woodworker would probably do. I'm going to leave it for now, because sometimes I do things and then I regret it later. Those are my 3 shelves. This is my top shelf, and I've got some details on this. So this is going to be the front of my, the front edge and the underside. So in other words, the shelf is going to be about this high, and this is going to be the top, the visible side. This is going to be the visible front edge, and I'm going to put a housing dado on the underside. I've got some pencil lines on there at the moment, just to help me, because I'm 74 and I forget things. Okay, what we're going to do, these 2 cut lines need to be centered on this. So if you took this to the end like that, and then measure this distance from here to there, and I'm going to tell you, I've got 3.5 inches. It might be different on yours. Half of 3.5 inches is 1 3/4. So if I pull this to 1 3/4 to that mark, that would be there, hopefully. That will equidistance my piece of wood, and I should have the same distance here, and I can see that I have. And what that's going to do, it's going to establish the knife wall for the inside face. I'll show you what I mean in a minute. I'm going into that knife nick, and I'm making a very small nick on the surface of my wood. That's going to give me the exact distance that I need. And I think you're going to love this method, because these are the kind of things that, as furniture makers, woodworkers, working with hand tools, they speed up the whole process. I'm going to switch to a pencil just for a minute, because these lines are often temporary. So I'm on that knife mark. Oh, let me switch to this one. This one will be black, so we can see exactly, well, if we can, there we go. So you can see the lines that I'm working to, I hope, as well as me. Same on this side. Now I'm not too worried about my accuracy. I'm putting these lines on so that you can see where I'm going ultimately. But accuracy is important. Okay, that's my inside line. So if I take my side pieces now, one of them, and put this on here, I want a housing dado that goes in there, and I'm pushing this to the front or flush with the back, because that's going to be the distance for my housing. This is flopping all over the place. Okay, there's the distance. So I'm away from the front edge, and this is going to be my housing dado. Now, normally, you probably understand that housing dados are usually the full width of the side piece, or the piece that's going to be let in. I want to do it differently. I want it to be less by about 1/4 of an inch. These are not critical. Let me turn this like this, because I'm going to lay this one out. So I want a 3/4 inch housing dado here. I better flip over to real money, and that's imperial, right? So here's my next mark. That means I have to put a step in the side piece later. And what that's going to do, it's going to make it a lot easier, because when we hand plane surfaces like this, you can be as much as a 1/16 of an inch out of parallel just by hand planing, especially on wide boards. This compensates, this helps you to get the exact distance you want. Because I've squared this end up, I can use it for a reference face, and this is the overall depth of the housing dado from front to back, or back to front. So here we go. Now this will show you probably one of the best things I've ever shown you, is the use of my router plane not for routing. I'm just going to use it for a marking gauge. So I'm running this is going to be the depth of cut when I come to cut the housing dado. I'm going to go with a knife on this edge to get that inside distance. There. And we're going to work really accurately on this one. I want that because it's key to everything. It speeds everything up, and as long as you don't make any mistakes, which I know you will not. So my knife wall is going in now, and this is permanent. Absolutely, I cannot get rid of that knife wall now. The first pass is very light, the second pass is going to be heavier. Now watch what happens here. I keep my square in place, and I go for my second parallel cut, which is 3/4 of an inch. I want it exactly 3/4 of an inch. If you've got one of these, this is a 6-inch starret, you'll find that that 6-inch starret is exactly 3/4 of an inch, and you can use that to set that distance. It's wonderful. There we go. So I can already see somewhat of a discrepancy between my pen line and my knife line. But I expect that, because pencils are never as accurate So those are the two walls to my housing dado. I don't need a gauge line across there. A pen line works just as well. Let me just square the second knife wall across onto this back edge. So I'd put my knife right into the knife nick and pull. So I'm looking for that. There it is. So I've got my knife walls all the way, oops, I just dropped my knife, all the way around. So we're going to be cutting this into a housing dado. So I set this one out exactly the same way. I've got my housing dados ready to chop, cut, whatever I want to do. I'm going to show you how to make the first housing dado, both exactly the same on each end. I'm going to show you one of the ways that I cut my housing dado. I've done my knife walls. You saw me square it with the square, but I go back in often like this with the knife just to strengthen the depth, and I compensate by angling over and making the bevel of my knife vertical. So then I go in with the chisel, wide chisel. Watch this. Watch this now, lift, and it'll split to the depth of the knife wall. This should make hand tool woodworking fully explained to you. So I've got a depth of cut there. It's about a 1/16 of an inch deep. I can see it. It's a good 1/16. So that means I've got to do this about 4 times and I'll be down to depth. Okay, normally I would be at this end doing exactly the same because I would have had that laid out. I'm going to go this side. Walnut is one of the easiest woods in the world to work. It's really a wonderful, pleasant wood to paint, to plane and chop into, scrape with a scraper, saw with a handsaw. It's got everything going for it, really. Okay, what do we do now? Do we go back in? We could just go in with the knife. The trouble with the knife going in is verticality. What you want is your chisel or your knife wall to be vertical. So let me go back in here. Now, if you don't have a nice wide vise with a big jaw like I do, that's just tough. Okay. Now what I was going to say is if you don't have a good wide jaw, clamp this to the bench top, and probably I should do that, but I'm not going to because I just like showing you as much as I can of how I really work in the everyday of life. So you'll notice I've got no holes in my bench. That's because nobody I ever knew when I was a furniture maker, when I was apprentice, ever had holes in their bench. Engineers have to engineer things that they have to sell. So give you a bit of bent steel, pound it into the surface, and you've got holding. So there we go. You can hear it's got a bit of an emptiness underneath. What you want to do, make sure there's nothing underneath and move your piece of wood to the sweet spot right over the leg. So I'm going here. Let's see if that made any difference. No, didn't make any difference. You know why? Probably my piece of wood isn't dead flat. Even after you've planed everything and trued everything dead flat, wood still moves. And I know mine did overnight. And that's typical of material that's hygroscopic, like wood. Oh, listen to that. That's a sweet spot there. Did you hear that? And there. Oh, there as well. Look at this. All in my favour here. Now, you can do this. I'm not going to. But you can go in here with bevel down and chop like that. And you can go right along. I don't like it because it feels a little bit shabby. So I'm going back into the vise. And see what I do. Bevel up, away from the front edge a little bit, and your chisel inclined, and just lift up with your hand, and that will split down to the depth of that vertical cut. It's not what you make, it's how you make it that matters. That's very, very important, and that I want that to stay with you if nothing else. It's how you make things that matters the most. Okay, so we've gone that way, we've chopped this one as well. Oh, this is magic, isn't it? Look at this, it's beautiful. This is how we really work in the day-to-day of life. I want to put this video out just because if you were doing this by machine, it's fast. I don't have any question of that. I don't have any question about it. It is fast, but sometimes it's just nice to use all your own energy. Use all your own skill, your mind, everything is engaged when you're using hand tools. I'm going to switch to a router. Now this is the router that I had the final depth to. So this one is set to the exact 1/4 inch. I'm setting that aside because I have the luxury of owning 2 routers. So this one is slightly different to that one, and you might consider, if you have got, you want one of these anyway because it's the best router in the world. There's nobody comes close. That's just my humble opinion. Let me just slacken those. So I'm going down to take the peak off inside there. Notice that my router at the front has an opening, and this is one that I wanted for routing when we come to a stop, because this edge on the underside there is going to be seen when I finish. If I use the other router, those little bits of wood will get trapped in that fore edge, and that's not what we want. So these are all the little tricks that we craftsmen have in our arsenal, and if we have any care about future woodworkers, we're prepared to pass them on. Look at this. This is beautiful. Look at this. This is how walnut works. So each one of those turns is 1/2 millimeter. So I'm doing a half turn is 1/2 millimeter. Thereabouts. Now I've gone down, I'm really not to depth yet, so I'm keeping my eye on the line here. Now watch what happens now. Now, because I've got a deep knife wall, I go in with my knife right tight into the corner, compensate for the bevel of my knife, just slightly. So that's gone down deeper than this. So the end of my chopping now, I don't need to chop anymore. I hope you've got your stopwatch on to find out how much time this really takes. Because if you have and you multiply that by about 8, that will tell you how long it's going to take you to cut your housing dados. Look at this, it's just like a plain surface. I can't believe it. It's so nice. So I have another 1/16 to go. So I'm going to turn this and I'm going to go down the inside corner again. Crisp and clean. Right into the front, all the way off the edge. So that's another 1/16 it's gone down. So that will take me almost to depth. So now you understand the reason for the open front of my router plane. I'm going to go in a little bit deeper. Wow, this is fun, isn't it? So we've got 8 of these to do, so that's, what, 10 minutes a piece, let's say. And we have almost what we need for a bookcase. The only part I can't really get to is right at that front edge. I've got to be careful here because I don't have that. That's too much to take off, so I'm going back to my This is so sweet. Okay, this is my last one. So this is the final deck. Watch that front edge. I don't want to damage there, and I will damage it if I'm not conscious. I'm going to make a claim here. About 12 years ago, almost nobody was using a router plane. And now everybody and their dog is using one. So this front edge, just go in with your chisel right on the line and chisel out the corner. And now you can hardly buy them, which is why I came up with my personal router plane, because I couldn't stand sending people to buy a router plane for $300 and $400 and a second-hand one that was selling for almost the same price. That's how you cut a housing dado. Another one this side, 3 on each side of the next 2 pieces, and we have all the parts ready to take the shelf and the sides that are going to go into them. Well, we already made the dados, and we're going to make the same dados, or very similar. And what we're going to do is start to lay out, and it's important that we get this right. Now, I'm going to suggest, I've got my, I don't know if you can see it, I'll put it on in a black pen for you, then you can see it. I've got my pyramid there, and that shows me that these are the 2 sides, this is the top. It gives me a little indication so that I don't mess up when I start laying out. I've got my 2 sides parallel, I've got them the same length, same size and everything. I've squared everything up, got everything nice and true. So I'm going to be working on the back edge, because these dados are not going all the way through. They're only going to stop, just like we did on the top one, but they're going to stop 1 inch from the front edge. I'm working on the back, so I'm going to align the pieces and drop them into the vise for security. But I want to do some layout with you first, because we have to get this right? So I clamp them in the vise, as I say, for security. Flush everything, make sure everything feels good. Not quite level there. Now we're good. So what I want is 1/4 of an inch from the top first. So I'm going to use my square just so I can put either pencil lines or pen lines on, so you can physically see them. Back edge, outside face, inside faces meeting with one another. I'm just going to make a line. That's the 1/4 inch that's going into the housing dado on the underside of the top piece. And coming down from there, I'm coming down 11 inches. Like that. So this is the top gap. And the reason it's got a top gap is I'm going to have a 2-inch piece that goes on the underside of the top piece. So ultimately the opening is going to be 9 inches, which is tall enough to take paperbacks and certain small books. But then I start to increase my size. Now my material is roughly 1 inch thick. So I'm putting this next mark, that was 1 inch down. You can do what you might want to do is square that line across like that, and then put your steel rule, which should be 1 inch. And then from there, we're going to come down 12 inches this time. So I'm coming down 12, square the line across. Now if I wanted to, I can use this blade on my square because that's 1 inch, and on these combination squares, generally they are that distance, they are thick, that width apart. Next one, I'm coming down 12 inches again. Of course, you can do these distances any distance you want, that's just entirely up to you. So there is my 12-inch mark, there is my knife wall, or my parallel line. This is going to be the bottom of the bookcase, and that's going to have an inset on the front edge called the kickboard. So we're going to work back up from that. Do you remember this blade on this particular square, this is the 6-inch combination square, is 3/4 of an inch. So I'm going to start transferring now. I don't need to do any mark on this because that corresponds with this distance from the cutting edge to the underside of the sole. So when I put that on there, I get the exact depth of that dado, section that's going to go into the dado on the underside of the top eventually. So here we're going to go now with a combination square, but this is 3/4 of an inch, and that's going to determine the exact width of my housing dado. So I'm going to make the first mark across the 2. And we'll go to the next one. I'm going to square across those 2 lines. Now I'm ignoring my pencil lines or my pen marks because the knife walls, the knife is what's giving me the pristine accuracy I want. So I'm going to that first line, going across the 2, and that's what guarantees the parallelity. I usually go on the other side of the knife, so I'm going to come in here and I just put my knife into the knife wall and slide up to it. That guarantees I'm right up against that line, and I go across the 2 again. So now I've laid out for my position for my housing dados. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to lay out one of these now because it's the same as the opposite side. So there's no question that these won't work. So we've laid everything out. We've got every position. We're really interested in this. And we're going to go through to the front. Now then, what we've got is we've got 2 pieces of wood. These pieces are going to join together like this. And I want a 1/2 inch reveal on the front. And then after that's done, I just square the lines across. So first of all, I'm going to take, I want to be 1 inch from that front edge. So if we set this to 1 inch, then we do, and we're going to use a pencil because we don't want permanent marks at this stage. So I come down, now this is, I'm going to be laying, this is my back edge here. So I just want a pencil line roughly where the shelf is going to go. So I make this mark, look at this side, I can guesstimate where this pencil line is going to need to be. And down here, look at this, I've got so many router planes, same here. That gives me the start and stop for my permanent lines. This is very important. So I know that I'm not going past the front because this housing dado is not going all the way through. Now I could have set this to that distance from the front, so 11 inches or whatever it is, or shallower, but I'm not going to do that. Okay. So I go in the back edge, I'm going in the knife nick that I made, and I'm going to make a mark here, and I'm going into the second one, and I'm going to do the same again. While I'm in this position, I'm going to do all of them. That way I can do the square across lines with the knife wall all the way through while I'm in this position. This is just economy of motion. That's all it is. And that saves time later. So let me go ahead and mark this line all the way across from that pencil line, which is right at the front there. Let me go a little bit deeper with this. So into my knife nick, slide my square up to it. I'm very conscious I don't want any slippage. So I'm just pressing, I'm going very lightly with a light pass. Whoops, yep, just a little tilt there, but no movement off the line. I'm going heavier, and now I'm going as heavy as I like. Going into the next knife nick now, and doing exactly the same. So I have a guaranteed parallel knife wall, or 2 parallel knife walls against one another. Now in the normal day-to-day, I would go ahead and do this one, and probably the other 2 on the other side, but I'm going to leave it at that now. So here I pull the knife wall just to strengthen it, and I go carefully. I don't want to jump out and create more than 1 knife wall. I do not need choices on there. So we're going to cut these housing dados 3/4 of an inch because we're going to reduce the shelf on the underside to this 3/4 to match the housing dado when the tenon part of the end goes into here. So that's what we're going to do next. We're going to mark the depth with the original router planes. Remember, we set this to the 1/4 of an inch, so we know this is guaranteed. This will correspond exactly to the distance of the step down on the front of the shelf. So I'm running a gauge line right here. While I'm in the zone, I'm going to do these 2 just like that. So that's the exact depth. This is the most amazing aspect of this method, is we're all guaranteed by the depth of this cut. Any adjusting we do with this one. When we get to the final depth, we establish it with that. So I'm going to cut the housing dado. I love cutting housing dados. I love joinery. I love everything that I do with woodworking. And I'm pretty sure you do too. And we're going to be doing this housing dado. And I did wonder when I started this, when I put this one together, I wondered, I asked myself, I wonder how long this really takes. So I'm going to time it in my head probably. So it's 10 minutes to, I shouldn't do this, I should not do this. But we're going to go with the chisel first. Remember, we strengthened that wall. I've lost my chisel hammer and I'm good to go. Okay, here we go. So first of all, we deepen the knife wall just like this. Walnut is so brittle that these shavings pop right out almost effortlessly without me making any wrist movement to make it happen. I'm going to go this way because it's convenient, but if I was without having to show you what I'm doing, I might even turn my board around and I might do a few variety types to get this expedited. So flick those out of the way. Now we can go with the chop, chop, chop. And if I had done these 3 housing dados and got them all to this stage, I would take this and put it on the bench and do all the chopping on all of them at the same time. But I'm not going to do that. But that's what I would do in the day-to-day of my furniture making. So here I'm going across the grain. I've got a nice deep knife wall. I'm down in there about a good 1/16, I think. So I can go quite heavily, but that's because I'm using walnut. Now, if you were using a soft wood like poplar, soft maple, I couldn't hit as hard as I am now. So remember that when you're working with your wood, because we learn about the wood doing it just the way I'm doing it. We learn about density, we learn about compressibility and things like that. So I don't want to open this up. If I hit too hard or I hit 2 or 3 times, it's going to make this recess wider than my 3/4. So it's very important. You've got to get to know your wood, get to know your impact on the wood, the intensity of everything. That's how we learn about wood, and that's what we don't get any other way. You can only get this with hand tool woodworking. There's no other way you can get this, and that's the neat thing. So we're learning all the time about our material, about our tools, about our own character. I'm in a good 1/8 of an inch now, back into my vise just for security. Watch what happens, just the same as we did on the other. I'm staying away from the front edge about 1/8 of an inch, just for now. This is really very efficient woodworking, very, very efficient, especially as we're learning about the wood too. Because that's what the essence of craftsmanship is. We have to know about our material as much as we do about the tools and the methods, the techniques and so on. Love it. Now if you remember, when we did the top, the underside of the top, we went in with a router plane at this stage. Let's get rid of all this. Make sure you get rid of these tiny, tiny pieces of wood because they will impact the surface of the wood. I'm going to slacken these and take this way up until it's barely kissing the surface of that ridge that I just created. There it is. Down a little bit. Cinch everything off, not too tight, just enough so you can keep adjusting as you work through your material. There's my ridge coming off. Turn a half turn or a 1/4 turn. So every one of these is going down about 1/2 millimetre, a 32nd of an inch, maybe a little bit less. And this swathe that I'm taking off now is widening with every pass. And I don't need to do the sides too much because it's beveled in as I was chopping. And this is where you become conscious of how close you're getting to depth. Listen to this. This is incredible. This is pure joy. Okay, knife wall now. Go into the corners just to sever the fibres across. Like that. And that's deepening to, that's actually going down about 1/16 of an inch. So I'm taking nothing. I'm going to slacken a little bit because that's just a little tight there. So I'm turning it about half a turn. And I'm running it along the knife wall directly up against the side. And this is where we start looking. I've got a good 16 to go yet. A little bit more. Another half turn actually. Blow that wood out of the way, because even though the front of my plane is open throat, I just want to make sure that I don't wedge anything between the foredge of the plane and that's because it's how you work that's the most important, not what you make. This walnut is so nice to work. If you've never made anything out of walnut, please consider making this. It doesn't have to be walnut, it's up to you. I jumped out of my groove there. Little swollen bit in the knife wall. So I'm just truing my inaccuracy up a little bit. Don't you love this? Okay, I have a little bit more. Let's see how that is. We definitely don't want to go too deep. Look at that. Smooth as silk and dead level. One more. So this is my final depth. Keep blowing, keep getting those shreds, those fibres of wood out of the way, because they will mar the surface, but they're not very deep. And usually they'll sand out with 150 grit if you have got a little bit of surface marring there. Here you want to watch it. It just doesn't get any better than this. Woodworking does not get any better than this. For me, for sure. Okay, so we got the 5 of those to do, and we're done. Into the corners, nice and crisp. Bevel down into the corner, just lift out that corner, and you've got this immaculate recess done. I'm just going to check with this just to make sure I was level. I was. So we go on to the next ones. But look at this, how beautiful, pristine it is down here. So we have 8 of those in the project, 8 cross-grain housing dados, and we're ready to start working on the shelves or whatever is going to fit into them. Simple. Well, we did have an interesting time, didn't we? We cut all the housing dados, we've got everything ready. They're 3/4 of an inch, that's what we wanted. But now we have to marry certain pieces to certain pieces. So we've got a side piece here. This is the front edge of my top. And if I hold this in position, you'll see where it's going to go. This is going to go in this position on the bookcase. So that means that this side piece, and specifically this side piece, is going to go into this housing dado here. What I've got is I've got a 7/8 piece of wood, and it's going into that 3/4 or whatever it works out at. You might have different sizes. I usually end up different sizes, but not by good intent. So here I've got to put a rebate on the outside of here, and that rebate, if you remember, we cut the recess with this, so we can use this to gauge our line onto this outside face. Now this goes all the way to the front edge, and this one does not have a step down in it because it's on the underside of the shelf. If there was shrinkage, the gap wouldn't be seen. But we have to go to another element. So we got two like that to do, one on each side. But when I bring in the shelf itself, this is slightly different. This shelf is going to go here in the unit. The flat face is going against the straight edge of the top of the shelf. The shelf is wider than the groove. I want this to overlap at the front. So this is going to nudge forward 1/2 inch. So it needs a step in this side. It'll need a step in the opposite end, but it also needs the step on the underside. And that again corresponds with the router plane cutter. So we can use that to gauge the line. So let's go ahead and do the side to top piece first. I don't need the top, but what I do need is the exact distance from the outside face. So I'm going to be putting my step onto this side, and I can use the router plane very carefully to get my knife wall started, which will be a wall I make with the cutting edge of my router plane. So I'm making sure the sole of the plane is flat against the end, and I have spent time making sure that this end is square in both directions. So I've got that. I don't need to worry about this front because that's not going to be seen when we're done. So I can take this all the way out. What I do need now is I need a marking gauge, and I need to set it to the 3/4 inch that corresponds with the groove it's going to go into. I'm going to set it dead on the 3/4, but I may not cut to it. I might cut shy of the full depth. And you could, if you wanted to, overset by a fraction of an inch. It's up to you, but I'm going to go, there's my 3/4 inch mark. This is my inside face, and this is what I want to register against. So I now run this groove, or this mark, exactly like that. And that's going to give me a line to work to. I'll leave it a little bit fat. I'm going to try it into the recess when I get to it. So what I do next, I'm going to go with my knife. I probably will use my square just as a safety precaution. But I run this up against there. I'm going into the mark, and I'm just deepening the cut because I can apply more pressure with a sharp knife and get that a little bit deeper, and that's just a great thing to do. So that's roughly about a 1/16 deep, so it's half the depth of what I want to go to. Into the vise. I'm going to elevate it just a little bit, and I just sharpened my chisel, so I'm going to come in like this. So I'm using the bevel of the chisel which will act as a splitter, and it'll separate those fibres quite easily, especially if you're working in walnut or any other brittle wood. So chop chop, just to get this across. And I've done all my scraping and planing and sanding to get this wood crisp, clean and sharp and ready for applying the finish. So I'm going to be very careful on my bench top and make sure that there are no chips in there that will leave divots in my material project. So we're careful, careful, careful. So we're going to go with a chisel hammer and a 1-inch chisel. I'm going to go across here. It doesn't matter whether you go even below your depth particularly. So I'm just going to chop like that, right up against the knife wall, but I'm not going with masterful blows. I'm just trying to be sensitive, and I'm pretty sure that that's driving my chisel close to the depth that I want to get to. So it really, what I've done by introducing this step here, I've eliminated the need to have this wood perfectly parallel all the way through the project. And often we'll put a step in like this which eliminates that need, because we're working with hand tools, we're working with hand planes and not machines. So that makes it a little bit more difficult for us. So I'm going to go just like this. There, little wiry grain there. I'm going to go higher, see if that helps. It does. I like the idea of this step, and I use these kinds of steps throughout my work in different ways. In fact, the last project I just made, I had this step in, and it made it so much more simple. Now I can go with a knife now, if I want to, into here, and that will take me down about a 1/16, if that, maybe a little bit less. So I keep the bevel as close to perpendicular to the face of the wood as I can. Now this is, I'm in the groove, I'm in the mark there, and I can tell just by that little tap that it's not, I can't chop at that level. So I'm coming up just a little bit. This is what we get with micro adjustment mentally and physically when we're working with our hand tools like this, because we do want this joint to be tight if it's possible. Don't worry if it's not 100%, because the glue does swell the wood and the wood stays swollen. You have to remember this, when you use glue, the wood in the joint swells and it doesn't go back, it doesn't shrink away. It stays expanded because the wood is restricted by the glue. So if something is slightly loose, not a whole lot loose, I'm not talking about sloppy joints, you can actually still glue your joint up. So here I am, tight in the corner again. And this is where we start to do a little experiment. I'm going to go on this part, this is, which part is this? So this is the back edge here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go right into my groove. So I'm in the groove of the marking gauge. All right. And I've taken that little bit off that back edge because, hopefully, if I have the space, so this is going to go in this position. So I can just offer this to the groove, and it seems like it's nice. It seems pretty good to me. So now I'm going to go across. Because I could leave some wood on if I wanted to. I could leave my vertical piece, this section here, I could leave it fat if I wanted to. So I'm directly into the marking gauge groove. Don't you love this? Now the other joints are almost identical. In fact, they are identical, except we have an added feature on the shelves. We have that step on the front edge. Just going to take the corner out there. That will just leave those fibres loose. I don't like scraping with my chisel. Let's give it a shot, see what we got. I have no idea if this is going to fit yet. Remember your bench top, remember to keep it clean, because you're chopping. So this is my front edge here. This is my outside face, and this is where I want to try it and see what I got. Is it going? Definitely my front edge is in, and I have a little bit of cup in my board. Is that going? I think I am in, and I think I've got a good, reasonable tight fit. So I'm hammering and pressing it down at the same time. I think that's going to go. You can see I'll have a little bit of tweaking on that to do, but I think we're very close. So I'm going to leave it at that. I'll tweak it as I need to, if I need to. So I'm going to pull this out, offer the back edge to it, and see, that might, oh, there you go. So that's going to go there. Just a question of tweaking things, seeing how we feel about it. I feel very good about that. That's going to go. So that's that one. Now we're going to set that aside. So I have another one to do on the other end of the other side. I'm going to switch to this one now. We're going to do very similarly on this one. Remember, I have my pyramid here. This is my top shelf. So this one is going to go here. So I need to score my line on the underside of the shelf. We have to get this right. And this is the front of my shelf. This is the front edge of my cabinet. So here I go again. Just make sure it's seated against the end and it's square. I love it. Oops. There we go. So we're going to strengthen that knife wall now with the knife. Am I on? Yeah. I'm good. So I'm using the square purely as a safety step, not necessarily, because the end of my wood was square and my gauge line from my router is also square. And I have the mark. Do you remember we marked this directly off the top to get the exact distances? So I've got that line square across. I come across here. Doesn't matter where you start and stop, but I'm going 1/2 inch And we're going to come down this face 1/2 inch. So you can set your square to a 1/2 inch distance like I have just done. And press that on. And you can use a pencil or a pen if you want to. So we're going to do exactly as we did a few minutes ago. This wood dust from the walnut, it makes my throat irritated. So even if you take the precautions, there's still dust from sanding and things. So I'm on the surface of the wood. My chisel is angled down because I want to expose the knife wall so I can put my chisel against the knife wall to chop down in a minute. And be conscious of where your grain is going as well. Let me throw this off here for a minute. So we're going to chop again. Keep your chisel perpendicular because this wood is going to be fine. We're not going to move the knife wall with the amount of hammer blow, with the strength of the hammer blow that I'm going to give it. By the time you've cut all of these housing dados and got these shelves fitted and everything, this is going to feel very rigid when we're done. I don't know how I did that, but I did. I just have a double knife wall there, but so I'm really only 1/1000th of an inch on it. So make sure your chisel is square, especially when you get to that front edge. You don't want to be off on that front edge. Oh yeah, what did I forget? So I'm going halfway down this time. That seems to be about right. You're looking for grain direction because, especially on this piece, I've got 3 different pieces of wood because I laminated this piece because I was a bit shy. And the grain might undulate. It might go in different directions instead of being straight. So I'm looking for straightness. I'm looking for how the chisel works in the wood. There it's dipping. It's going down a little bit. So is that one. So I'm careful here. This is the front edge. I'm safe. I'm good. So I'm going to chop down a little bit more. I think I'll go with the chop cut because it gets a little bit deeper. So I hope you see by now that what we've done is we've made this very simple, and we're just using the router plane to get all of the depths on the recesses. We're going to have a kicker board and a top rail that's going to be recessed exactly the same as the shelves are on the top shelf and the sides into the top shelf. So we've made this incredibly simple, so we don't have a variety of different depths and have to have different gauge settings and things like that. We're making this so simple, and that's really what we do generally in our woodworking. We look for ways to lessen the amount of energy it's going to take, especially if we're using our own energy. So we're using our own, all our own energy, our mind and everything. That's what hand tool woodworking is incredibly able to do. It demands your whole attention. You can't allow yourself to drift off and read a book or look at your phone or How many times do you see me look at my phone when I'm making these videos? No way. Why? Because I'm totally entertained by my work. No, it's more than that. It's just, this is a high demand woodworking. Doesn't want to go in, that one. Aha, missed it still. There's 1/1000th of an inch there. There we go. Now here's where I hope I've gone deep enough, and I did. So again, I'm going to go with the knife right into the corner just to sever any fibres that are hanging on. And you can always see it because everything pops out. Now, where we're going next is we're going to go on the edge. We've got to go down that 1/4 of an inch from the top or from the side, or whichever aspect we're looking at. So here, I go down. I'm going to go low in the vise, and that's to reduce any vibration, because vibration is always going to be negative. This is going to be 1/2 an inch from that edge. I think I must have marked the other end. So that's the depth we're going to go to. I'm going to start directly on the cut line, but I'm going to saw away from the line, so it's going to be sloped only slightly. And the reason I'm doing that is I want to pair cut to get it perfect. I don't want to risk sawing into the face or the side. So I'm chopping now, looking for grain direction. That's what we do all the time. We're always conscious of that grain direction. So I'm 1/2 an inch from the front edge, which means that the front face of my shelf is going to be 1/2 an inch from the front face of my side piece. So watch what happens here. I'm going to go with a narrower chisel, and I'm going to put my chisel right on the knife wall on this outside edge, and I'm going to pair cut to the knife walls on both sides. And I hope I got that right. I think I did. So we've got another 5 of those to do, but that's not that big a deal, is it? You know, think about it. How much time did that really take us to cut the 2 fitted sections? So we're going to try again and see how we did on this. See how close we got. So this has to go this way, and that goes on the underside. So we go in like this, and I think, look at this, we're very close. Looks great. Look at this. I'm happy with that. We probably have some extra fitting to do. We may have to take a plane shaving here and there. But once we've done that, we can put it together, we can put clamps on and see if everything clamps up for a dry fit. Exciting, exciting. This has been a great project, and we're going to finish off the joinery next. We only have a couple of things to do. We've got to put well, it's not a dado, this is going to be a groove, because this is going to be a kick board, which is what we kick when we make a piece of furniture. We usually put something, and it stops dust and spiders and mice and rats and everything from going underneath your bookcase. So this one is going to go in here, and we're going to do the joinery exactly the same as we did the shelves. So this one here is going to go on the underside of the top shelf, and it's going to start that 1/4 inch down. So we're going to put a groove in here, and this is going to have like a stub tenon, a barefaced tenon on the end of it, but they're going to be made the same way as we did the others, except we're going with the grain instead of across the grain, which has different elements to it. So first of all, let's take a square. The end of our bookcase, the top of our bookcase is square, so we can use that as a reference face. I'm going to go with two things. I'm going to go with a pen as well as a knife, and I'm going to come in 2 inches from the front edge. I'm going to make a pen mark like this, all the way up from the bottom of the bookcase, and it's going to go to the underside of the shelf. This seems to want to be sliding around. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go with the knife. That's going to give me the front edge of my housing dado, but I want a 3/4 inch groove, not a 1 inch one. So I have this, but you could still use your square and measure from that knife wall that you just created, 3/4 like that, and make another knife wall. But you could, if you had a smaller square like this, you can set this one up too, and that will give you, so this is going to be, I should tell you now, I just made a mistake, and I'm going to tell you now because you'll ask me why I put that on. My bookcase is the groove is going to, the groove is going to start 2 inches from the front edge, which means I'm going to be putting a step on the front of my kick plate, and that's going to be a 1/4 inch set back from the front, just as we did on the shelf. So it's going to have a shoulder line on the front of that kick rail. Now what I want you to know now, while we're doing this, while we're in the zone and everything, I'm going to show you we've got a 4 inch shoulder on here, then we have a 1 inch, or roughly 1 inch, so that makes 7 inches, and then we have on the top, we've got another piece that's going to go here, so we've got 7 inches plus 2 inches. Basically that gives us a 9 inch shoulder, and that gives the stability to the bookcase, along with the fact that we're going to use a plywood back that's going to be rigid when it's screwed onto the back in the grooves, in the rebates, and that's what we depend on very much for our rigidity on a bookcase. Bookcases, people always try to move bookcases full of books, and that's probably the very worst thing you can do for the joinery. So I'm going to just pull a line here and a line here, and I'm going to measure down from the top, so it's going to be the width of my material, and I'm going to measure that 1/4 inch is going to give me, the shoulder line. Everything is slippy. So that's going to give me the underside of my shelf. I'm going to go with a pencil. It doesn't mark quite as much as there we go. So that gives me the start and stop of where my shoulder line is going to go. So let's go ahead. I'm going to go in between the pencil lines, close, and I'm going to come either side of this blade because it's 3/4 inch. So that's my layout done on this side, and it will be exactly the same as it is on the other side, on the opposite side, but it'll be an exact opposite, but the depths and everything are going to be identical. Now you'll start to see the simplicity of this, because the depth of those housing dados is going to be governed by the router plane that we're going to use to finalize the bottom of the groove that we're making there. So that's the depth. That's going to be exactly the same as the shelves. All of this starts to gel. It's all coming together now for you, because now you see how we've eliminated really quite a lot of measuring, and we've got to a point where all of the joinery is pretty much identical. Now the other thing that I want you to see is that when we, now of course these are not going to be seen, so I don't really need a start and stop for everything. I can just go past. But the neat thing is it's the router ploops. It's the router plane that's going to govern this. And here's the additional element that I want to show you. When we come to doing the rail, this is the front of my rail. I can take my router plane and I can mark my shoulder line with the router plane just as I did on the other. Now I'll reinforce these marks. That's my back, this is my front. I can reinforce these marks when I'm ready with a knife and square, but you can see how all of these shoulders come together to make this superbly strong and rigid when we're done. So we're going to cut one of these so you can see how I'm doing it. So I'm going to be cutting into this housing dado. I just love the way hand tools work and how they make me think, and how this vise gives my leg and knee the exercise I need, and all kinds of stuff like that. So I've got to go 3/4 of an inch here. I've got a narrower chisel, that's 5/8. I'm going to take a small saw and I'm going to saw down those knife walls. Just a little bit. Try not to jam into the shoulder line of your housing dado if you can help it. Okay, I've got that bit done. Now I'm coming back here. So I started at one end. Now I'm starting at this end. Don't worry about starting at the depth you're going to. It doesn't matter if you run past on the underside of this bookcase, because nobody is ever going to take it apart. But it's a good place to practice accuracy if you are a beginner. And I'm hoping this will really inspire you to make your bookcase the very first bookcase you might ever make, or have made, should I say. So I'm going down, down, down. I'm pretty close to depth. I haven't yet bumped into that front part. Going back here. This side is much easier than this top side because I don't have that edge to worry about. But you could use a bigger saw. I probably should use a bigger saw, really. And you can just simply chop this as you would a mortise. But this gives you beautiful, crisp lines. And you're establishing the walls as you would in a mortise, but much more accurately. So I'm guiding with my right hand and really pressing down with my left on top of the back of the saw. Now bevel down, bevel up, it's up to you. I'm going to go a little bit tighter in the vise so I don't have as much flex. I want to be above the vise jaw because I'm going to finalize the depth using the router. Okay, I'm going bevel up. 1. Wow, is this fast or what? So we just flick that excess out of the way. And we can go to the two router method if you want to, although well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to do something a little bit different. Here there I'm right in the marking gauge mark, or the router depth mark. I'm going to double-handed this now, like this, and just start to jab out that excess wood. I'm definitely above my depth, the depth I want to go to, pretty much. And if you take the final depth router, this one that's set to the 1/4 inch deep, and if you lift up the heel of it here like this, just a little bit, and gradually lower it, so now I'm resting on the surface of the surrounding wood, and this is already down. I'm going to switch around, because if I keep going this way, the front of the router will catch the groove, the housing dado. So I'm going to work this way as best I can. And if need be, I would just go to my chisel. And down. I'm looking perfect. And I'm as good, this is as good as it gets. So I've got this beautiful groove. Do the same on the top one, do the other end, and I've got the same. So what we'll do next is, this one is going to go in here, so this will be on the underside of the shelf. You'll see a discrepancy of 1/4 inch here, and that's because the shelf has the step, and that's going to come right down on top of this. I hid this knot behind, it's never going to be seen. I did that on purpose. It's forward planning. You're considering this all of the way through your project every time. So let's go in the vise. I still have the same setting that I had for the shelf on my marking gauge. That 3/4 inch gets the depth that I want. And now I'm gonna go with the square and the knife. Now I did check, one thing I didn't tell you, I don't think, is this is the bottom. When I had my, well, this is how we got it. Where is my bottom? I want to make sure you've got everything you need here. The distance between these two knife walls, I did this with my router, but I have to check that the mark that I made with my router ends up the same as the marks that I have. I've got them exactly the same, so the distance is exactly the distance that I want. Otherwise, if it's over, it will stop the shoulder going together on the rail. It'll do something like that, so I want to be careful. So now here I checked that my end was square before I ran my router plane to establish that groove. So this is accuracy, accuré. This means to care. That's where we get that word from. Now I'd do the same on this one normally, but I'm just going to do the one for you. I'm hoping this is the right one. Wide chisel, just like we did the shelf. Love it. Okay, I'm going to go with the knife. I'm going to put my knife tip into the groove, into the knife wall, and then pull, and that's going to take out the excess. Now I can chisel again if I want to, this time like this. So nice sharp chisel. I could go with the knife again, but I like the perpendicularity I can get with my chisel, just like this. So what happens when I drive the chisel, there's always a slight gap between the end grain and the chisel face, but when I drive the chisel, That single-sided bevel of the chisel drives the face of the chisel into the end grain fibres and consolidates everything. But I'm still sensitive. I don't want to overdo it. I don't want to hit it twice, because that will change the position of that knife wall. Split. Great. Wow. This can't get much simpler, can it, really? Imagine doing all of this and trying to judge which equipment, how many fences and how many jigs you need to take care of such a simple task. This is where I hope it goes in. So it's going to be 1/4 of an inch down. It's going to be flush with the bottom. Come on, Paul. And this is where you can micro adjust if you need to. I don't need to, because it's about as perfect as it gets. Look at this. It's solid. I may have to take a little bit more off, but I'm going to check with my bottom shelf now. I don't think I will. I think I'm feeling pretty confident. So when this goes in, you'll see how that 1/4 of an inch is dealt with. And this is, whoa, look at the way this came together. Okay, I'll spin it round so you can see what we're shooting for right there. So nice, tight, everything's lined up beautifully. That never happens. Great. Okay, so I've got the other 3 to do. I'll get those done and get back to you. we're closing in on this conclusion of this piece. I'm going to introduce this plane. This is called a Philistor or a rebate plane or a Rebate plane, depending on which continent you live on or which country you live in. And this is going to cut a step down in the inside corner of my two upright side pieces. So this is the outside face. I've got the fence lining up on the inside, and I have this shoe which is called a depth shoe or a depth stop. And I'm going to run this along there. And what that's going to do is it's going to create this step down. Why am I putting a step down in there? I want to put a plywood back on. So I've made this the thickness of my plywood, and I've come in 1/2 inch from the inside face. That means I can put screws along here when I come to glue and screw the back on this thing. And it's going to be so rock solid, you could put the Eiffel Tower right on top of it. Here we go. Okay, now I'm running my plane this way, and I can feel a little bit of resistance, but I don't have any tear out on the top corner. If I get the slightest margin of tear out on that edge, I set a marking gauge to that same distance and I run it along the edge of the wood, and that breaks the surface fibers and it helps to prevent severe tear out. So that's why we do that. Sometimes we don't always do it. Now, should I take a thicker shaving? Probably. So I'm going to try it, because sometimes when you set a thicker shaving, it takes less effort, but sometimes it clogs more. To adjust this, we move this lever just a slight distance, not very much. That gives us a thicker shaving, but like I said, it tends to clog on the inside corner. So we have to poke the inside corner out a little bit. So this doesn't take very long. I'm pushing diagonally. I'm pushing the plane this way, so the corner of the cutting iron is going to the internal corner. I think I can take even more off than that and take a thicker shaving. And these planes sometimes, because they're all metal, they vibrate just a little bit. There. See, that's a thick shaving, but it's clogged. Once I've gone down, I check with the plywood piece to make sure I'm to depth. Keep pushing those corners out. It's a shame really, because this plane is really a very good plane, but I haven't found one yet that didn't clog. I'm going to take a knife in there. And I've done all kinds of micro adjustments to my plane, and I've never been able to stop them from clogging, just a little bit. It's more an irritation than anything. I found it's better to take shorter strokes. I'm only talking now just to cover up the amount of time this takes for me to clear the wood. So if you take shorter strokes, lift up with the heel, it will sometimes help. Now I'm down, the shoe is resting on the wood, so it won't go any deeper. Make sure you have to keep cinching things tight, because they do work loose because of the vibration. So that's that one done and dusted. So let's just check, make sure we're even to depth. That's perfect. So that's one done. I've got to do the next one, and then we're ready to do a dry run to assemble this. Make sure you do it on the right edge. It's the back edge of the cabinet. It's terrible when you take it off the front edge. Okay, so here we go again. Clean cut, yeah, it's pretty clean, but I've got awkward grain there for sure. I've got a knot or two right in this edge. And when you do this, as I said, it breaks the surface fibres, but you can also go with a knife and go right into that gauge line carefully to make sure you don't jump out. And this will sever the fibres much more deeply. And that goes in, I'm saying about, but it's probably at least a quarter of an inch. A 16th of an inch. And when it goes that deep, you've already severed the surface fibres for several plane strokes, and you will have eliminated your problem. Definitely. But we're close. We're close with the structural aspect of the work we have to do. Sorry about this. There's nothing I can do about it. I have worked with these planes all my life, and it's just a characteristic problem of this particular plane type. Now what that's done, that's sent the vibration has loosened this, and that sends the blade back up. Another common problem. But at least we know how to fix it. A little bit more. See, it's loosened again, just purely from vibration. It's loosened all together, and it's come off the screw as well. Amazing. So that will adjust the alignment of the blade as well, which I really don't want. So make sure you realign everything. Clean out shavings between the sole and the surface you're planing will stop the plane from functioning too. But don't ever, ever give up. Nearly there. Nearly. So we're only going to do the sides, and we can't really do the top easily because the top overhangs, and it would have that ugly step in the back when you are finished on the overhanging outside edge, which I really, really don't want. So what we're going to do on the underside of the top is we're going to do what we call a planted rebate. And what that's going to do is we'll screw that from the underside. And I've just got a splinter. Okay. Just let me get this out. Great. So what we've got to do now is plant the rebate piece on the underside of the top shelf. So we just, all that is simply screwing a strip of wood on that inside face of the underside of the top. Okay, where is my top? Here's my top, and here is my strip of wood. This is the back edge. This is going to go here. One thing I probably will benefit from, this is the top. This is going to go in here. So I'm going to put this in position. And the reason I'm doing this now, so that's the correct position. This is flush at the back, near enough flush at the back. So do this carefully. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want this to line up with this inside edge of the back there. So I'm going to take a knife, put a knife nick here. I'm going to do the same at the other end, and then I'm going to screw that in place. And this will guarantee that this this strip that's going to catch the back of the cabinet is going to be aligned perfectly with the rebate. Let's go and put that there. I want this to be accurate because I'm going to align my plywood with it. That's it. So we're going to drill a few little holes in our wood, and then maybe we will countersink it too. Okay, I think 3 screws is plenty. One in the middle, just eyeball it. Somebody, to see if you were inaccurate, would have to be lying on their back underneath the cabinet at a certain angle to see between the shelves. So I'm not going to worry too much. But my middle one is in the middle. $29, and I've got 14 1/4, so it's close enough. So I've got my stock going in here, right in between those 2 walls. And we'll see what kind of screws we've got. That's very close to being too long. But I'm going to go with it. I think they're fine. The glue is what really holds this when we're done. Make sure any burst through from your drilling should be off, otherwise it'll hold a gap. And you don't need a lot of glue for this, just the zigzag will work. And I've got my knife mark to work to. There we go. Not magnetic, huh? Good. So I'm working to that knife mark. One more in the middle. You just check my depth. I'm going to go with this just to make sure I'm straight, which I am. I'm going to check. Those screws were very near, but they didn't come through, so I'm happy. So that's that bit. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to apply some oil to the shelves on the underside, top side of the insides of the cabinet, and then I'm going to leave that to dry, and then I'm going to come back in and glue it up. The reason I'm doing that is it makes it much easier to get the coat on when it's like that. So I'm going to get that first coat on. Subsequent coats I will work with. I'm applying a finish that I like. It's a finish that I use quite a lot, but you could use any finish you want to. I just found it so much easier to apply the finish before I put the piece together to get the bulk of the inside done. And some parts, this is a wipe on, wipe off finish. So what you want is as thin a coat as possible. And that's what I'm going for here. So I'm putting the coat on and then wiping it off. Yeah, it works so nicely. And I'm just using paper towel. A better quality paper towel works well, not the kind that crumples and crumbles and falls apart in your hands. So I'm just being careful where I apply it so it doesn't go into the recesses, because it will glue to that, or it won't glue to that, that's the thing. So wipe it on, and then you wipe as thoroughly as you can, as if you're trying to wipe all the finish off, as though you made a bad mistake. So I'm doing the inside faces of all the pieces first. The tape on the edge is to tell me which shelf is going where, because they're custom fitted. So there's my top piece. Of course, that now, because the joinery is completed, that can only go in one place. So and I've got a stepped housing that's going to go into the shelf, and that meant that I could make all of my housings exactly the same, and then I could put the step which compensates for any unevenness I might have in my planing on the thickness of the pieces. So after I've done that, then I go and I make the cut down, the step down in the ends of the shelf correspond exactly to the recesses. It works so well. So wiped on, wiped off, leave to dry for 5 hours, and then go back in, put another coat on, leave that to dry 5 hours, probably less, but I would just go with the recommendation of the manufacturers, because there is something called cure time, and though it might feel dry on the surface, it may not be cured through, and that's the big difference. So that's what you're looking for with most finishes. So I've run that zigzag of glue, and now I'm putting the kick plate, the kick board in. So you can see now I've got no glue. No glue will penetrate this finish that I've applied, so it won't stain the wood, and that's the nice thing about it. There is no staining. And any excess glue will just come right away with a soft cloth or a tissue. I should be icing cakes. Look at the expert way I can run that bead. Sometimes I'll spread it more and sometimes I won't. So I'm putting this on that surface. on those two vertical edges, which will be the shelves actually. And so that gives me the extra glue surface. So I've got an extra 1/2 inch of glue surface on that, like short stub 10s, whatever you want to call them. So the glue is the point of no return. Once you start gluing up, you don't want to be disturbed. You can't take a break, you can't have a cup of tea, you can't do too much beyond listen to the radio if you want to. So you've got quite a lot of areas that you need to get glue into, and you need to get the clamps on as early as you possibly can. So work methodically, work to a pattern. You've probably assembled this 3 or 4 times before you get to this stage anyway, so you will know where every component goes. The zigzag is the best method I know of. It's better than any rollerball, it's better than any other type of gluing assembly method. You can see there on the outside, I haven't put any finish on the outside because I don't need to, because it's easy access. Check that your clamps are going on and that they're parallel to the long axis of the shelf. If you're out 1/2 inch, then your cabinet will be clamped up out of square. That's the very worst thing about it. And so you want to make sure your clamps are parallel, running parallel with the long axis of the shelves in this case. And afterwards, when you check, there's probably nearly 100% probability that you will be dead square. So I'm tweaking everything, making sure everything aligns. I've got the top piece to put on, I've got the kick plate to go in, that kind of thing. But I've got time now. I've got those together, the clamps are in place. I've got time now. I'm not anxious. So I've got clamps front and back. And what I'll do in between those clamps, in between the front clamps and the back clamps, I will use a hammer and I'll strike that midsection just in case something got caught and it didn't seat fully. That hammer blow will break any glue freeze and you'll be settled that you've got the full surface of the end of the shelves in connection with the recesses. This is my top rail going in, so I'm just running beads of glue in here and zigzagging the glue in, things like that, just ready to insert the top rail that goes under the front edge. And I'm gluing it to the underside of the top as well, which is great. Making sure the dado is seated. I want to get long clamps on the sides, one top and bottom, to pull the top dado down onto the side pieces and make sure that they're glued up. So I'll leave the clamps on until the glue has cured and set. I'm checking myself corner to corner, still questioning. Look at that, bang on, exactly where it needs to be. So I'm checking my plywood for square. Not always is it square. Most often the machined edges will be dead on 90. I very rarely have found a piece of plywood that's not square. When I go across the grain, I'll go with a knife wall, but sometimes even when I'm going with the grain, I'll still go with a knife wall. Less important, but very important when you're going cross grain, because it stops the fracture of the surface with the through cut from the saw, whether you use a jigsaw, a bandsaw, or a handsaw. Sometimes it's difficult. It's difficult for me because sometimes plywood on the videos can look as though I'm going with the grain when I'm actually going across the grain. And sometimes that's because of the sander marks from the belts when the plywood is passed through the final sanding surface or final thicknessing. Now I've applied finish on the plywood back, and I do the inside and the outside, and the reason I do is because it's another layer against damp or moisture getting into the plywood. The thing that will cause the plywood to lose that outer surface will be surface damp, moisture in the atmosphere, whatever. And this serves as a barrier, and it's a long-lasting barrier too, because you know, this is not a piece of furniture that's going to be outdoors, so it will last, I'm anticipating, 200 years. I put a straight edge on there, and now I'm scraping off the finish because you can't glue that finish to another surface. So all I've done is, it saved me taping it off. I've just gone back in with a straight edge and a chisel to scrape off the glue that will have contact with the surface of the back of the cabinet, shelves and so on. This is the shelf part where I'm gluing, taking off that section of finish in the midsection. So I'm pre-drilling the holes now. Now I'll be screwing through from the opposite side, so I'll pre-drill and then I'll go in with a countersink and countersink all the holes, ready to receive the screw heads. So I'm countersinking, and I always countersink because it seats the head of the screw so neatly. And I don't care if you use self-drilling screws with self-countersinking screw heads, nothing beats a bona fide countersink, especially on furniture. So beaded glue all the way around and then on the back sides of the shelves. And what that will give you is a rock solid shelf that will never move, never. No matter how many books you put on it. And this shelf, this bookshelf, is definitely scalable. You could make it twice as long or half as long again or 3 times higher. The idea of me showing you how to make this is to put the whole skill of making bookshelves in your arsenal of abilities and skills. I'll drop my piece of plywood in place, make sure it's aligned with the top and sides, and this guarantees the squareness of the piece. And this is probably one of the only bookshelves I would ever say that if it was full of books and you needed to drag it across a floor, you could do it with this bookcase. Nothing would break. I'm using the clamp to pull the plywood to squareness, so there must have been some slight gap at the top. Rather than me straining and pulling against myself to do it, I just use the clamp, and the clamp's closing up gaps on the top edge against the plywood. I use my finger as a guide on 90% of everything I do, and now I'm marking the position for the screw holes. Pre-drill the holes usually. I'll measure, if I think this might one day be in the middle of a room and somebody might see the back edges, I'd like everything to be as near symmetrical as I can get it. So this is the upstand on the back of the bookcase. I'm just using what's to hand. You could use any radius you want. That's about 2.5 inches, but whatever you have to hand or whatever you like. Just taking off the bulk of the corner just at 45 degrees, and then I go with the saw rasp, which is not a rasp and it's not a saw. Just to make the round, and then go in with the file, the flat 10-inch file, just to clean up the surface and take off the arris on the corners. I watch that edge. I'm looking for a line going square across as I go. And in this case, I can glue this on the back and then screw it into place, and then I can go back in when I'm ready and put the oil on, the finish on Often oil finishes are called oil, but often they're not oil at all, they're just a liquid. I drove a couple of finish nails in there so I could rest my piece of wood on it while I clamped it in place. And then I pulled the screw, I'll pull the nails out later, but that's what they were. So now I just have the outsides to oil. See, the whole of the inside is oiled with enough coats. I don't have to touch those again. Now I go on the outside surfaces, apply the same number of coats, and I'm good to go. We start out with circular strokes. We go in small circles, working across the surface, just like that. And then we can go in with elongated strokes, going from one end to the other, and that gives us a finish that just about disappears. It won't have any streaks in it, it won't have any circles in it. So I've gone in, I've applied my coat just with paper towel, and now I go in with paper towel again and wipe everything off, working with or along the grain, and that gives me a beautiful finish. This finish feels like glass when it's done. There's something about a project when you put that last coat of finish and the wood starts to pop, and especially with this one with the black walnut, it really came together for me. I've enjoyed making this project, and I want you to follow with me as you start yours. When you pull this together, you'll end up with exactly the same project, and I think you'll enjoy joining me on the journey. I have loved making this piece. It was so fun to start planing those rough boards and come up with a project like this. So I hope you'll enjoy joining me and making your own bookcase.